As twilight descended on March 9, 1945, across the scattered islands of the Marianas in the Pacific, something unprecedented was taking shape. On the coral runways of Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, islands wrested from Japanese control months earlier, American ground personnel worked methodically around hundreds of silver Boeing B-29 Superfortress bombers. Major General Curtis LeMay, the hard-driving commander of the 21st Bomber Command, had implemented a dramatic departure from conventional bombing strategy. Inside each aircraft's expansive bomb bay, crews were loading far more ordnance than standard operating procedures typically allowed. Each bomber would carry cluster munitions packed with 1,500 M69 incendiary bomblets, small cylinders filled with napalm, capable of burning at temperatures approaching 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The chosen target represented both strategic calculation and moral complexity. Tokyo's Shitamachi district stretched across merely 12 square miles, yet housed 750,000 people in tightly packed wooden dwellings. As evening turned to night at 35 minutes past 5, the first massive bomber began its takeoff roll from Guam's airfield. Throughout the darkness that followed, the thunderous sound of right radial engines filled the tropical air as wave after wave of bombers lifted off. They flew independently rather than in the traditional box formations, stripped of most defensive armament to maximize their incendiary payload. Pathfinder aircraft led the strike force, tasked with marking the target zone with fiery beacons visible across miles of darkness. The main attack force would follow, releasing their weapons from altitudes between 5,000 and 7,000 feet, dramatically lower than the heights these bombers were engineered to operate at. What transpired in the hours ahead would showcase American air power's devastating potential, while simultaneously revealing the tragic inability of Japanese defenses to mount effective resistance against what would become the deadliest single air attack in human history. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress represented the pinnacle of American aviation engineering when it entered Pacific combat operations. This revolutionary heavy bomber demanded over 1.4 million hours of engineering work during its development phase and consumed $3 billion in resources, significantly exceeding even the cost of developing atomic weapons. The four-engine strategic bomber incorporated revolutionary innovations, including pressurized compartments for crew comfort at high altitude, remotely operated defensive gun turrets, and the most powerful reciprocating engines ever mounted on an operational aircraft. Production was spread across multiple facilities nationwide. Boeing operated assembly lines in Seattle, Renton, and Wichita. The Glenn Martin Company built Superfortresses at their Omaha plant. Bell Aircraft Corporation manufactured them in Marietta, Georgia. Each completed bomber measured 99 feet from nose to tail, with wings spanning 141 feet. Four Wright R3350 duplex Cyclone engines, each generating 2,200 horsepower, propelled the aircraft. Fully loaded, a B-29 could transport 20,000 pounds of munitions across a combat radius of 1,600 miles, reach altitudes exceeding 31,000 feet, and achieve maximum speeds of 357 miles per hour. By the spring of 1945, American manufacturing had delivered roughly 2,000 of these strategic bombers to operational units, with production accelerating toward an eventual wartime total approaching 4,000 aircraft. This massive industrial undertaking demonstrated American manufacturing supremacy. Boeing's Kansas facility alone was completing more than 4 Superfortresses each working day. The 20th Air Force, under the personal command of General Henry Arnold, had initially deployed these bombers from Chinese bases beginning in mid-1944, then shifted operations to the newly captured Marianas starting in mid-November of that year. 3 bombardment wings operated from the Marianas under the 21st Bomber Command. The 73rd and 313th Bombardment Wings flew from Saipan, while the 314th operated from Guam. These units could dispatch over 300 B-29s on a single mission, each aircraft maintained around the clock by specialized maintenance personnel. Japanese air defenses presented a stark contrast in capability. By early 1945, the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy maintained entirely separate command structures with virtually no coordination between the services. Their principal night interceptor, the Nakajima 1N designated Gecko or Moonlight, had been hastily adapted from a reconnaissance design. Armed with pairs of 20mm Type 99 cannons positioned to fire upward at 30 degrees and downward, the Gecko could theoretically attack bombers from unexpected angles. However, Japan had manufactured only 479 of these aircraft during the entire war, with many already destroyed in combat. The Kawasaki Ki-45 Toryu, called Dragon Killer, provided another night fighter option, equipped with a 37mm nose cannon and obliquely mounted 20mm weapons. Only 1,700 had been built since 1941. Without airborne radar for nighttime interception, these fighters depended on searchlights and visual acquisition, nearly impossible tasks against swift bombers operating in darkness. Ground-based defenses proved equally insufficient. Tokyo possessed fewer than 500 heavy anti-aircraft guns defending the entire metropolitan region. The Type 88 88mm gun provided primary high-altitude defense, while the Type 98 20mm cannon offered close-range protection with an effective ceiling of merely 11,500 feet. Most critically, Japan lacked fire control radar for anti-aircraft artillery, relying instead on optical rangefinders and acoustic locators that became worthless in poor weather or darkness. The numerical comparison told a sobering story. While America could deploy hundreds of B-29s from the Marianas alone, Japanese forces operated perhaps 200 functional night fighters throughout the home islands by March 1945. Fuel shortages severely restricted training flights, leaving inexperienced pilots with minimal night flying proficiency. Aviation gasoline had become so scarce that numerous aircraft remained grounded to conserve fuel for defensive operations against the anticipated American invasion. Curtis LeMay had taken command of the 21st Bomber Command in January 1945, inheriting a strategic bombing effort that had failed to produce decisive outcomes. Previous high-altitude precision attacks from 30,000 feet had proven ineffective due to the jet stream. Winds exceeding 200 miles per hour scattered bombs far from intended targets. Engine stress from climbing to extreme altitude with heavy bomb loads caused frequent mechanical breakdowns, with magnesium alloy components overheating beyond safe operating limits. Cloud cover obscured targets 70% of the time, forcing bombardiers to depend on primitive radar systems. After analyzing these operational difficulties, LeMay implemented a revolutionary tactical shift that would transform the air campaign against Japan. The new approach was both radical and rational. LeMay ordered all defensive guns removed except tail positions, allowing each B-29 to carry 7 tons of incendiaries rather than the standard 3.5 tons of high explosives. Flying at 5,000 to 9,000 feet would avoid the jet stream, reduce engine stress, and improve bombing accuracy. Night attacks would minimize exposure to Japanese fighters lacking radar and trained night combat pilots. Individual aircraft would navigate using LORAN radio signals, attacking in a continuous stream over several hours rather than concentrated formations.
Following the raid, casualty estimates varied significantly among different authorities. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey calculated 87,793 fatalities and 40,918 injuries. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department reported 83,793 deaths and 40,918 wounded. The Tokyo Fire Department estimated 97,000 killed and 125,000 wounded. Historical consensus indicates that over 100,000 people died, exceeding the immediate casualties from either atomic bombing. The attack destroyed 267,171 buildings across 15.8 square miles, eliminating 25% of Tokyo's structures. Over 1 million survivors lost their homes. The industrial impact proved severe. More than half of Tokyo's manufacturing occurred in small workshops within residential areas, and their destruction significantly impacted production of essential war materials. Thousands of skilled workers were lost or displaced from the city. American losses were comparatively minimal. 14 B-29s failed to return, with 96 airmen listed as killed or missing. Several bombers encountered severe turbulence from thermal updrafts created by the fires, causing loss of control. Others received anti-aircraft damage during their low-level runs, though Japanese gunners struggled to track aircraft at such unusual altitudes. Aircrew members later reported detecting smoke even at their operational altitude. Crews who had initially questioned LeMay's tactics were sobered by the operation's scale and impact. General LeMay later reflected on the moral implications, supposing that if he had lost the war, he would have been tried as a war criminal. General Arnold sent congratulations, stating this showed the crews had the courage for anything. The operation's impact immediately influenced American strategy. Within 10 days, similar raids struck Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe, affecting Japan's 4 largest cities. The campaign then paused only because the 21st Bomber Command had exhausted its incendiary bomb supply. Production immediately increased, with American factories prioritizing M69 manufacturing. The contrast between American and Japanese capabilities had reached its maximum disparity. While the United States could replace lost B-29s within weeks, Japan could not rebuild its destroyed urban areas or replace lost workers. American industrial production exceeded Japan's by a factor of 10. The technical advantages made each American weapon significantly more effective. The B-29 program's $3 billion cost exceeded Japan's entire 1945 military budget. While America produced 50,000 tons of incendiary bombs monthly by mid-1945, Japan struggled to maintain basic ammunition supplies. The methodical nature of American operations reflected a scientific approach to warfare. The Chemical Warfare Service had constructed detailed replicas of Japanese neighborhoods at Dugway Proving Ground using pre-war architectural plans. Standard Oil Development Company created napalm through extensive chemical research. Harvard and the University of Chicago contributed analytical studies on fire propagation patterns. This integration of scientific research with military operations contrasted with Japanese military doctrine that emphasized traditional values over material considerations, an approach proving inadequate against modern warfare methods. Japan's inability to develop effective countermeasures demonstrated strategic limitations. Despite the February 25 preliminary raid that destroyed 28,000 buildings, authorities made minimal improvements to fire defenses. Proposals to create fire breaks by demolishing buildings were not implemented. Evacuation plans remained largely theoretical. Military authorities insisted civilians maintain their positions even as intelligence indicated massive incendiary raids were planned. This situation resulted from inter-service coordination failures and leadership constraints. The Japanese night fighter forces' limited effectiveness exposed the technical disparity. Pilots like Lieutenant Sachio Endo achieved individual successes, credited with 8 B-29 interceptions, but these were exceptional cases. Most night fighter pilots could not locate targets in darkness, especially once smoke obscured visibility. Without airborne radar, pilots depended on ground controllers using acoustic detection, methods that became ineffective once fires started. The few pilots who intercepted B-29s found their 20mm cannons often insufficient against the bomber's robust construction unless they achieved critical hits on engines or fuel systems. Some pilots attempted ramming attacks, sacrificing themselves for single bomber kills. Tokyo's fire department exemplified Japan's infrastructural limitations. The city operated 286 fire engines, mostly manual pump units requiring multiple operators. Water pressure was insufficient for large-scale firefighting, while infrastructure damage compromised the water distribution system. Fire department procedures emphasized protecting individual structures through traditional methods, approaches inadequate against thousands of simultaneous ignition points. When the conflagration began, most fire companies were overwhelmed rapidly, their equipment destroyed, and personnel forced to evacuate. The psychological impact on survivors was profound and lasting. Many described feeling that traditional protection systems had failed. Refugees departing Tokyo spread accounts throughout Japan, their experiences contradicting official information about the war situation. Worker attendance at factories declined significantly as civilians lost confidence in official propaganda. The term routine air raid entered common usage as cities were systematically targeted. By August 1945, 66 Japanese cities had experienced major incendiary attacks, with much of urban Japan severely damaged before the atomic bombings occurred. The operation's success influenced American planning for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. Military planners calculated that continued incendiary raids would eliminate remaining industrial capacity by October. LeMay believed that strategic bombing alone might compel surrender without requiring invasion. Joint Chiefs of Staff estimates indicated that conventional bombing had already caused approximately 900,000 civilian casualties and would cause millions more if the conflict continued. These assessments influenced President Truman's decision regarding atomic weapons, viewing them not as alternatives to conventional bombing, but as potentially decisive psychological weapons. The human dimension transcended national boundaries. American aircrews carried psychological burdens for years, processing their role in the operation despite wartime context. Richard Bale of the 9th Bombardment Group could observe the fires clearly from his aircraft, an image that remained with him. Japanese survivors lived with lasting physical and emotional effects. Families on both sides experienced irreplaceable losses affecting multiple generations. The raid created numerous orphans and widows, overwhelming social support systems, and contributing to post-war challenges. Recovery efforts revealed the comprehensive nature of the destruction. Medical facilities in the target area were eliminated along with educational institutions, religious buildings, and administrative centers. The morning of March 10th revealed a transformed landscape where eastern Tokyo had existed. Only concrete and brick structures remained standing across miles of ash-covered ground. Survivors searched through unrecognizable areas for landmarks that no longer existed. Recovery teams required heavy equipment to clear areas. Many victims could not be identified. Mass funeral services continued for weeks. Waterways remained blocked with debris for extended periods.
The industrial impact exceeded initial projections. Tokyo's eastern districts contained thousands of small workshops where families produced specialized components, precision instruments, electrical components, mechanical fittings. Their elimination disrupted supply chains supporting major factories. The loss of experienced craftsmen, machinists, and technical specialists who required years of training proved irreplaceable. Worker productivity in surviving facilities declined as employees dealt with personal losses, housing challenges, and diminished morale. The campaign's expansion proceeded systematically after replenishing incendiary supplies. Operations resumed in May, with refined techniques achieving greater efficiency. By July, B-29s were distributing warning leaflets before raids, informing civilians which cities were targeted next. Psychological operations demonstrating complete air superiority. These missions became routine operations, with some encountering minimal opposition. Japanese defensive capabilities progressively weakened as experienced pilots were lost, ammunition depleted, and civil defense systems collapsed. International legal considerations remain subjects of historical debate. The 1907 Hague Convention addressed bombardment of undefended cities, but interpretations of defended and military targets proved complex. Post-war tribunals prosecuted certain leaders for civilian targeting, but did not address Allied bombing campaigns. The precedent established that military necessity could justify civilian area impacts influenced subsequent international humanitarian law development, despite advances in precision weapons technology. Weather conditions' role in amplifying the operation's effects demonstrated American utilization of environmental factors. The March 9-10 raid was deliberately scheduled for strong winds following a dry period. Meteorologists analyzed Japanese weather patterns extensively, identifying optimal conditions for fire spread. The varying wind speeds that night, between 17 and 45 miles per hour depending on location, exceeded some predictions. This integration of meteorological science with military planning exemplified American operational approaches. Individual B-29 crews experienced the mission differently than planners anticipated. Many were affected by observing the scale of destruction below. Aircrew members reported that smoke and atmospheric disturbance were detectable at operational altitudes. Pilots managed aircraft through severe turbulence created by thermal conditions. Some crew members later requested different assignments.
struggling to reconcile their participation with personal values. Others focused on the strategic objective of ending the conflict quickly. Japanese military response revealed command and control limitations. Anti-aircraft units engaged continuously but achieved limited success in darkness and smoke. Fighter squadrons launched 90 sorties but accomplished scattered interceptions. Fire department leadership received insufficient warning about the raid's scale. Military authorities prioritized protecting government and military facilities while civilian areas burned. Communications failed as infrastructure was destroyed and messengers could not traverse affected areas. Post-war memorialization reflects evolving historical perspectives. Unlike Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which gained international recognition, Tokyo's firebombing remained less widely known outside Japan. Survivors advocated for decades to have their experiences documented. Katsumoto Satome, himself a survivor, established the center of the Tokyo raids and war damage, preserving testimonies that might have otherwise been lost. The challenge of commemorating civilian losses while acknowledging historical context created complex memorial narratives. Contemporary military strategists study Operation Meeting House for insights about air power capabilities and limitations. The raid demonstrated that urban destruction alone doesn't guarantee immediate surrender. Japan continued resistance for 5 more months. It proved that technical advantages can overcome geographic challenges, but showed that distinguishing between military and civilian targets becomes extremely difficult in modern warfare. The evolution from precision to area bombing revealed escalation dynamics in total war. The 21st Bomber Command initially attempted precision strikes following established doctrine. When these proved ineffective, LeMay shifted to area incendiary attacks that were operationally simpler and more impactful. This progression occurred through operational decisions rather than explicit policy changes. By March 1945, urban area attacks had become routine, with target selection based on population density and industrial distribution rather than specific military installations. Survivor testimonies document lasting trauma. Many experienced persistent psychological effects decades later. Children separated from families often never learned their relatives' fates. Yoshiko Hashimoto's testimony remains in historical archives. The memory of that night never leaves her. Her mother, father, and sister died, while her baby and she survived. She thinks about them every day. The social structure of working-class Tokyo was fundamentally altered. Extended families dispersed, traditional businesses eliminated, neighborhood networks that had existed for generations disappeared overnight. The ultimate assessment of Operation Meeting House involves its role in ending the war. While historians debate whether strategic bombing alone could have compelled surrender, the raids clearly accelerated Japan's military collapse. The systematic urban destruction created conditions where continued resistance became increasingly difficult. Emperor Hirohito later referenced the bombing campaigns and domestic situation as factors in the surrender decision. The 100,000 who died in Tokyo contributed to ending a conflict that invasion might have prolonged, potentially causing millions more casualties, a calculation that provides little comfort to survivors but influenced strategic decisions. The story of Operation Meeting House illustrates warfare's evolution from limited military engagements to comprehensive societal conflicts. Residential areas built over generations were destroyed in hours by weapons manufactured thousands of miles away. The conflict that began with territorial expansion ended with advanced technology affecting civilian populations who had minimal direct military involvement. The disparity between B-29s carrying sophisticated incendiaries and Japanese defenders equipped with basic firefighting tools illustrated the decisive importance of industrial and technical capabilities. The ironic history remains that this operation's impact was overshadowed by atomic bombings 5 months later. The greater immediate casualties of March 10th became less prominent compared to nuclear weapons' unique nature, allowing conventional bombing to receive less scrutiny in subsequent conflicts. The statistics provide only partial understanding.
325 B-29s launched, 279 reaching target, 1,665 tons of incendiaries dropped, 15.8 square miles affected, 267,171 buildings destroyed, 100,000 casualties, 1 million displaced. Behind each number were individuals. American aircrew members executing military orders, Japanese families in residential areas, children separated from parents, survivors dealing with profound losses. Operation Meeting House remains history's most destructive air raid, serving not as a military achievement to celebrate, but as a sobering reminder about modern warfare's capacity for destruction, where strategic objectives can justify extensive civilian impacts and entire populations become affected by industrial-scale conflict.